I don't
consistent.
know how believable all this
Um,
information is, Joe. First, you say you win a game with Ink Eyes. Now you're saying you've trophied with Storm. I think.
it's I'm a fraud, I guess.
Welcome to Cube and Chaos. Spend some time with us, enjoying old cards and new, whether they are weak or powerful. Welcome everybody to yet another episode of Cube and Chaos. We have a lot of things to talk about today, and we also are here with our first guest.
Yeah, so our first guest is Vintage Cube Extraordinaire, Joe.
Okay.
He's here to talk with us a little bit about that. He's also been participating in a lot of the custom cube drafts we've done, so he'll throw in a word here or there about Chaos Cube as well.
I am Jacob, as always.
I'm Max, and
I'm special guest, apparently Cube Extraordinaire. That's a lie. Joe.
All right. So the Vintage Cube on Nodo is still available as of now, I believe, until the 31st. Is that correct?
I think it might be the 29th.
Yeah, 29th.
All right. So you have to get in your last cubes very quickly now.
Right. I think a lot of people are going to be sad about it going, even though I think in something like the past 8 months, I think this is the third time Vintage Cube has been up. So it's been up quite a bit, actually.
I've played a bit every time, never a lot, but I think I had like 5 drafts this time. I did enjoy it.
That's good. Yeah, I'm probably going to get in a few more myself, but I think someone who's played easily way more than either of us is Joe here, and it sounds
Yeah, I've been pretty much just playing as much as I can, going infinite with this kind of cube season, which has been surprising and also a lot of fun to fill my time with. Probably gotten, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 drafts in at this point.
Nice.
Sweet.
And you're at about half that many trophies, right?
Yeah, I hit 13 yesterday.
Nice. Yeah, just a note, whenever you're trophying about one every 2 drafts, you're really killing it.
Yeah.
Boy, how do you do it?
Mostly luck, actually.
No way.
I've had a lot of success drafting like big mana blue decks that have a lot of interaction specifically. Cards that like I tend to pick early are like colorless planeswalkers and also like artifacts fast mana. Like had a lot of success drafting Ugin, Karn, both Karns actually, and like even like not just having like a Soul Ring or Mox. Worn Power Stone has been great.
Are you doing like Tinker kind of stuff, or are you just like ramping into these big?
Not even. No, just really fast mana. And powerful cards will pretty much just get you there. If you have like a bit of cheap interaction, like counter spells, like Spell Pierce, Mana Leak, even Mana Tithe is a great one.
Nice.
Pick up.
It's still the same deck still, Mana Tithe and Worn Power Stone.
I mean, yeah, just blue white, hold up counter spells, play artifact mana, and then just run out the big boys.
I've been watching Benny Hills, the trophy leader, a fair amount on YouTube, and it sounds like he does a lot of similar stuff. I know he really likes blue white, thanks to like the Teferis and Fractured Identity, and he definitely takes cards like Worn Power Stone pretty highly. Are there any like cards other than like the ramp cards or the payoffs that you really like in the blue big mana decks, like stuff like Urza or anything like that?
Yes, actually Urza has been really overperforming for me. It just does so many things. Like it not only ramps you even further, it also is a great combo with Winter Orb. So you can lock out your opponent, then tap it on their end step for mana, and then you have your lands on tap, and then theirs don't, which is very good. And also having the construct that grows with artifacts I think I had a deck with a bunch of fast mana Urza and Little Karn, and just like 2 massive constructs and a lot of counter spells, just easy wins.
Nice. Yeah, that's a really nice way of breaking the symmetry with Winter Orb.
Yeah. Also, like if you have the mana to activate Urza like several times, it's just like your opponent can't catch up. I think one draft I had like Tezzeret and Mana Vault and like Soul Ring and Urza, and I'd produce like 20 mana a turn, activate Urza 4 times, like cast Emrakul for free.
Oh, that's a good hit.
Yeah.
Sounds like you pretty much turned it into Golos at that point. That's like fun.
Yeah, and it's also a lot easier to activate than Golos.
Have you played any of the Fabled mid-range decks that show up from time to time, or is that something you definitely want to keep your hands away
Like
from?
the fair decks.
Yeah, fair with some interaction, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you have to have a very, very good set of cards to make that work. And it it's fair, but it's I think I played one that trophied and like probably drafted a couple more that didn't. But if you get like the cheap interactive stuff like Swords to Plowshares and then Mana Leak.
We're blue-white again anyway, like this is now from blue-white ramp to a blue-white mid-range.
Just I've been playing a lot of blue-white. Blue-white is very powerful, and then you get like cheap planeswalkers, maybe Splash for Ashiok, Dak Faden, and then just outvalue them. Because sometimes just having interaction is better than like having your deck solely rely on one like broken combo. Because I was playing against a green deck which ran out channel turn 1 or 2, and I was like, oh, might concede. I don't know. But they poured all their mana into like a massive Stone Coil Serpent, and all I had to do was play Petty Theft side of Brazen Borrow, and they instantly conceded.
Yeah.
And then there was another game, I was telling Max about this earlier, in which I was in the finals, and I think it was one of my like mid-range blue-white decks. And my opponent just they ramped out Oko turn 2. I spell pierced it. They conceded the game, thought about it, and then conceded the entire match. And then I got a trophy.
Well, that sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
It sounds like if you had a tip for for at least that player, it's, maybe don't pack it in.
Calm down.
Don't pack it in when you're in the finals. Like,
well, don't pack it in ever. Like so many times I've thought about conceding, and then I'll somehow scrape out a win. I had this really powerful mono red aggro deck, which I trophied with, even though I haven't been playing a lot of aggro, just because it's not as fun to me. I was playing against like a Tinker deck, and they had like Mox, Soul Ring, Tinker, turn 1 into Wormcoil Engine against my aggro deck.
Oh boy. Yeah, that would make me think about conceding as well.
And I was like, it has lifelink, I'm playing red, it's turn 1, I should concede. And then I was like, no, I won't. And I ended up winning that game.
That's pretty crazy.
Because I had like a strip mine, like took them off mana, and then I had like an abrade, and then I was able to edge my way back into the game while also keeping them off, like doing anything else.
I'm trying to imagine like the best sequence of cards would deal with that. I imagine like a Fiery Confluence would be involved, but
yeah, I think I found that like Fiery Confluence and Abrade are very strong in mono red, and also just in the format in general. So I think it was a combination of that, and then like Seething Song out like a Thundermaw Hellkite or Glorybringer.
I think Benny Hills has called Fiery Confluence like the best card in mono red, which it's like a pretty big claim, but at the same time I'm not really about to argue. It's a very strong card.
I mean,
it does everything.
It does everything, yeah. it'll just blow out artifact decks, and then it'll give you that reach.
So in addition to not conceding, are there any other mistakes that you've seen, or at least things that you've seen other players do that you wouldn't do? Could be like passing a card really late or making mistakes in game.
Yeah, I feel like there are key turns especially in Vintage Cube, because the cards are so powerful, right? That you have to like account for what your opponent has and also what your cards can do, and really taking your time with those. There was one game I won that I shouldn't have because my opponent cast Nulamog, right? And I was not really prepared to deal with it. But I had an Academy Runes up. So I had an Academy Runes, a Solemn Simulacrum, and then I had a clone. So I cloned the Nulamog. I blocked with my Solemn Simulacrum, so it went in the graveyard. They didn't see the line. So basically, they thought they'd won by milling me out because they got into attacks with Nulamog. So they got into attacks. I had 0 cards in library. They thought they got me. I Academy Runes my Solemn Simulacrum on top, and then I attack them and mill them out first. But they had something that could have exiled it, and I would have lost.
Right. Or even if they had just, if they had exiled the Academy Ruins when they had played.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
That was definitely one of my prouder moments.
Yeah, that's a good one for sure.
It's just seeing the line and then hoping your opponent doesn't see it as well. Sometimes is good enough.
Yeah, so I have had 2 very mediocre pick one, pack ones season. And I will send you a link with a imgur of these pick ones, and I just want to pick your brain about what you would have picked there.
Okay, let's see. Personally, for this one, I would go Wasteland or Venser.
Okay, so let's describe this pack a little bit. Like, what are the other cards that are at least interesting to you?
So I think the potentials for me. So you have Gideon, ally of Zendikar, if you're just like slamming mono white, right? Which is a good, it's pretty consistently open, pretty powerful, fast deck. Definitely not the most powerful card in the pack, but if you're going that way, you could. Same with Lotus Cobra. I wouldn't necessarily pick it, pack 1, but it's definitely a very strong ramp piece in green. The reason I'd say Wasteland is because it keeps you really open, and it's really, really good in decks that often are like very open lanes, like mono red, mono white. So I'd argue even if you were planning on going mono white, I think the pick might still be Wasteland, just because it's such a powerful effect to keep your opponent off of getting to their big mana plays, which will be probably more powerful than most things you can do in mono white. But if you already have your stuff out and you're able to keep them off doing their stuff first, it's just backbreaking. And then Venser's just a very powerful card for blue. It's interactive. It can kind of be a remand without drawing a card. It can bounce like things that they channeled out, or
reanimated,
or things that they reanimated, or like if they had a Black Lotus and they were like turn 4, or turn 3 Wormcoil Engine or something like that. It's just a way to keep yourself in the game with that interaction and tempo.
Yeah, I asked in our Discord, and many people said they've taken the Venser there. Wasteland is certainly a very interesting pick. I took the Sacred Foundry out of the pack because I thought that was keeping me the most open. But yeah, it's like blue, a white-red duel. Also not like a real duel, is not really a great pick. So, but that's what I did.
Yeah, I don't mind it as a pick.
It didn't end up making my deck, so
yeah, I feel like Wasteland would leave you more open for any deck.
If I were doing my typical aggro thing, I would be very tempted by the Gideon because I think it's the second best finisher in mono white, at least at the 4-mana slot. But I think you make a good argument for Wasteland if someone was planning on playing aggro or something like that. I think if it were strip mine, I'd be a little bit more convinced, but I mean, in Vintage Cube,
Yeah, absolutely.
in Vintage Cube,
Strip mine's just strictly better.
that's true.
But like some of the most powerful cards, especially in mono red, I found were like Rishodon Port and Wasteland,
Yep.
Strip Mine, just anything that can like stop your opponent from doing what they're doing while you're just playing these like 1-mana 2/2s that are just getting there.
Absolutely. And the other thing is
Very powerful.
right. The other thing is the 1-mana 2/2s or just 1-mana 2Xs, whatever. They wheel like very consistently, and those interactive lands, at least I've found, wheel much less frequent.
So yeah, I think that would be the pick there. And there's a second pack down here.
Let me have a guess. Maybe because you said you like the colorless planeswalker so much, you would have taken Ugin here. I mean, it would have surprised me a little bit, but after what I heard earlier, maybe.
Maybe. This is actually a much stronger pack one, pick one.
It is, but it's not like I felt it was not super clear what to hear.
Yeah, I think the cards that immediately like strike me as things that I'd pick would be Ugin, perhaps Preordain, just because it's such a good cantrip. But I think the correct pick is probably Bribery, because that's just 5 mana win the game in most matchups.
I really hate Bribery though.
It's not fun. It's not fun for either of you, but I think it's probably correct.
Yeah, I think I'm likely to agree with that. I like the blue cards best out of that pack, which is something I don't say all that often, but I think Bribery is just a little too busted.
Yeah. If you were expecting like blue to be completely cut, there's like maybe a chance you'd pick Ugin, but Ugin's much more likely to like perhaps come around, although it's very unlikely. There's almost no way Bribery would come around.
So you're 30 drafts deep to this iteration of Vintage Cube. You make an argument for listeners doing the same thing. What do you enjoy so much about this cube? Do you think things can be improved? Would you keep it as is?
I think you know what the decks are most of the time, which is like both a positive and a negative because they're very fun decks. I think perhaps if they introduced some cards that like spiced it up a bit, it would be perhaps interesting because you have very like set archetypes and you know pretty much what a good deck would have. Like you know what a mono white deck looks like, you know what mono green looks like, you know what a storm deck looks like, you know what a reanimator deck looks like, you know what like an artifact tinker kind of deck looks like. But I think what they do really well is these decks are really fun to play, and they're varying degrees of success that you can like draft them and read like the lanes in terms of what's open. And then there's just like playing with powerful cards is a lot of fun in my opinion. It's not necessarily like balanced or like fun for your opponent if you're just like Forest, Mox Emerald, Channel, Emrakul, or even if you're like Forest, Black Lotus, Crack for Green, Channel, Finale of Devastation for 10, get Progenitus, hit for 20 with haste. I think there's something a lot like very fun about that, and it's not something you get like elsewhere. So I think that's what like keeps me coming back, is that like it's a format I understand, because like the kind of decks that you can construct are pretty you know what you can construct, and you know what you're going for, what cards you want to see for the most part. So it's like it feels comfortable, but it's also like there's surprising interactions, and there's a lot of good additions recently, like Urza, Brazen Borrower. I've had a lot of success with those specifically.
And Sharknado, Shark Typhoon.
Shark Typhoon, I do play. Yeah, it's good because like it can't be countered when you're cycling it, so it's very good in the like control matchup, and just like when you have so much mana, right? Because you can get ridiculous amounts of mana in the format. It's something you can like pour a lot of mana into.
It's a little like Krasis on steroids to me. Like, no, you don't draw as many cards with it, but it's just so flexible. Like, not being able to
Yeah.
counter it, spending all of your mana, doing it at instant speed. It's really, I think.
Yeah, just just flash in an 8/8 shark as like a removal spell, like evasive threat, and you draw a card.
And Ink Eyes is not back. So the
Yes.
world is safe.
I actually won a game because of Ink Eyes. Like a reanimator.
Because of your Ink Eyes.
Yeah, because of my Ink Eyes. Like reanimator mirror. Ink Eyes happens to be very good.
Oh, that sounds sweet. Like a great game, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think Reanimator is like the strongest deck, and it's actually very good against itself because like you can reanimate their thing, you can animate dead their thing. So it's actually like a very nuanced mirror match, but it can be very fun, and Ink Eyes surprisingly helps with that.
Something I think you could take from that is I think all the reanimation spells that target any graveyard, which I think might be all of them in Vintage Cube, I think are really nice sideboard cards if you're not in Reanimator but you are playing black, because they are
especially if they're cheap.
right. Something like Necromancy, I think in particular, which your opponent goes, for instance, to reanimate something, and because you can cast Necromancy with Flash, effectively counter their spell, and maybe you draw 7 cards with your Gristlebrand or whatever before it dies.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna pose a question to you that Jacob asked me at least a couple weeks ago. So you were talking about how the archetypes for Vintage Cube are very clear cut. Do you think that they'll ever do like a major overhaul of Vintage Cube where they like change up the strategies like entirely, or at least a bit?
I don't think so. I think it's really successful as is. It's probably like one of the most popular formats they have on MTGO. I think financially it wouldn't make sense for them to change it too drastically. And I think it's in a good place regardless. Like it's still fun even though you've drafted all the decks. There are still like cool interactions that you can kind of shoot for. Like I was watching Caleb D's stream and he had this step where he like had to draft this infinite loop with Parallax Wave, Oblivion Ring, and Relic Warder, where you could like infinitely like blink your creatures and like exile your opponent's creatures. And like it wasn't necessarily like the strongest thing you could do or the most consistent, but it was like interesting to see that these little combos are in there. So I think it's in a good place still, and it's still in an interesting place. So I don't think they'll change it.
Yeah, I mean, there was some point where they changed the Legacy Cube by removing Storm from it. I think many people didn't like it, but some people did like it, and I could see that as something that they would do, like choose one archetype and completely remove that to get space for something else. So like removing Storm from Vintage Cube would probably
I'd be very upset. I'd be very upset.
People would be rioting in the streets about that.
I would as well. Well,
yeah. My last trophy was actually with Storm, surprisingly, because it's very inconsistent.
I don't know how believable all this information is, Joe. First you say you win a game with Ink Eyes, now you're saying you've trophied with Storm. I think
I'm a fraud, I guess.
Sounds like it to me.
I also passed Tendrils like a fool and it didn't come back, so I had to brain freeze it. And I ran into like someone running an Eldrazi in their main deck first game.
The classic LSV Tendrils isn't good in Storm. That's a fun one.
Oh god, yeah, I wish I had Tendrils. Yeah, I had to like sneak out wins with Memory Jar, drawing them those last couple cards.
Nice.
And yeah, actually, Memory Jar is very useful if you're trying to brain freeze them out, because it kind of gives you this flexibility wherein like maybe 1% of situations, so you can brain freeze them, and then if they have like 6 cards left, you can crack Memory Jar in response to the last 2 brain freeze triggers, to guarantee the win, because you never know what those last 6 cards could be. So that was a good interaction.
Okay, so now shall we move on to Chaos Cube?
Oh yeah, second iteration.
Right.
Just as a short reminder, the Chaos Cube is a 2,800 card cube run by Finite, and roughly play out like a high-powered Chaos Draft. You won't be able to predict which cards you get or not.
The first time, I think I had relatively few cards that felt like stone unplayable, but I did have a lot of cards that were extremely good. Cards like Cone of Flame, Incremental Blight that just about single-handedly won games. Not the most fun thing to play with ever. Would not recommend putting them into like moderately powered cubes. But yeah, this last time I think things were a lot less like Vintage Cube, I should say. Fewer I win the game cards, and I think that was a success in and of itself. I ended up with this red-green stompy deck, and I won one match. I had another match that I lost that was extremely close, and I played a third match where it felt like from the beginning I was just doomed. Like I had no chance because my opponent had multiple tappers, which for a while served as removal spells on defense for them, and they went on the aggressive, and then the tapping twice in a turn cycle interaction was very good for them. But they also had regenerators, and none of my giant green creatures had trample. So I would play like a 6-drop, and my opponent would have this like mana 1/1 regenerate, and I it would just be very sad. It was kind of the Cutting Regisaur, Baleful Strix kind of feeling, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
Similar.
First time around, I forced 5 color, and that didn't go great.
Fair enough. I will say the second time around, somebody played 5 color as well, and they said that things actually went a lot better for them. Like the match they lost felt like it amounted to basically drawing poorly. It felt like the matches they won were practically unlosable. So
yeah, in the first iteration, we had the payoffs as like the big artifact sunburst creatures, where you'd spend 9 mana, 5 of which was like
Uberg.
Specifically different colors, and you'd get 5 counters on it, and you'd spend 9 mana, and you'd be like, yes, I've cast my like game-winning spell. And then it would do nothing on the turn it came down, and they'd cast like a 3 mana removal spell or like a 4 mana removal spell, and you just lose because you spent your whole time ramping up to this, getting your colors right to get this big payoff, and then it just is so vulnerable to any removal. So it didn't end up going well.
Yeah, that sounds like a major disappointment. Really poor like design on my part, but I think that hopefully, I mean, those cards are gone, the Sunburst cards. I think now that the payoffs are a lot better. Most of the payoffs are at 5 mana, of course, because I've colored things. That's usually where they end up. And one of the things that I'm really, I think was a very good choice on my part is I tried to make it so there aren't too many cards that break certain power and toughness rules. So for instance, like creatures with flying, there are no creatures with flying that have like power 5 or greater. And there are no like air elemental cards with 4 power and toughness of flying at 5 mana, except for the 5 color payoffs, where I've decided that there are like cards like Chromat that can be allowed. 5 color, the 5 mana Sunburst thing with flying that's in there, and also Draco, which is actually the most expensive like tournament legal card in Magic, I think. So at 16 mana, and I think it costs 2 less for each basic land you have, and it's a 9/9 flyer. It's just also huge, also an artifact, but not 9 mana, only 6 if you get all 5 colors.
I mean, that sounds better, but does it have any like protection or anything?
Some of them do.
No, it has to shatter.
Yeah, that one can get shattered. Most of them can't though. Most of them are like 5 mana 7/7s like Silver Queen. Chromat in particular, I think, can put itself on top of the library if someone tries to kill it. And it's the kind of thing where if you kill one of the 5 color payoffs and you like stayed in the game, but it doesn't mean that you like snap won the game the way it did with the Sunburst cards.
These rules that you just talked about, I think they are very nice as guidelines.
If I made it a little clearer to everyone up front, the kind of things that would be allowed, a couple things might happen. One, I would expect that a lot more people would try to play the 5 color deck, and then it wouldn't work as well because the fixing would become scarce, all that.
Well, draft board is open.
Right, for sure. Yeah, the other thing is, I think people's card evaluation improves if they have an idea of what's good or what's too good. Do either of you want to talk about the decks you had the second time around?
Yeah, I ran red green, and it also didn't go well. For actually the same reasons. I think I again made the mistake of thinking I'm gonna ramp out these big spells and they're gonna do something. And they ended up not doing anything, and then I lost almost every game.
Yeah.
So I had like a bunch of like 7/7 worms that did nothing. And I was like, I'll just get enough mana. I had like Search for Tomorrow turn one almost every game, which was just pretty lucky. And then I just got overrun by much lower to the ground decks, and I was pretty much drawing towards Savage Twister as my only out most matches.
Got it. Okay. So, couple questions. When you say like much lower to the ground decks, are you saying like really aggressive decks?
Just like decks that would tempo out well, and play creatures that were cheap and effective and like had pretty cheap interaction, like bounce spells or like removal spells. Those decks I really struggled against.
Got it.
And also, I think we played the same deck with the regenerate creatures, and I just didn't have enough ways to deal with that. I think they were just kind of stone blocked all my big creatures, and I couldn't remove them, so they kind of just ran over.
Right. So that's, yeah, it's unfortunate because it makes me think that I've got a fair amount of work to do in terms of redesigning things. I don't want to go so far as to say it's some kind of like proof of, red green in particular being a weak archetype because I feel like the sample size is too small. But it was a problem that I was really worried about, mainly because one kind of shorthand rule for Chaos Draft in general, but also for the cube, I guess, is that the farther back you go into Magic's history, the better spells get and the worse creatures get. So
Yeah.
red green,
With that green.
exactly, red green, a creature deck. Green has just about zero removal spells in there. Very few non-creature spells in general. You mentioned Search for Tomorrow. I imagine that was just about it. And yeah, I think regenerate. Like in order to make green better, I think I'm gonna have to start trying to remove cheap regenerators from the cube. The other option would be I try to make it so the green ramp payoffs all have trample. I feel like
Yeah.
it'd be pretty difficult. So, do you guys have any other opinions, suggestions, things like that, especially about the topic?
I found, I think maybe my deck was just bad, and I was probably also competing for red green with you. So I don't think this is necessarily like par for the course. But I struggled against flyers as well. I didn't have like those really strong like green reach creatures that just shut down those decks. And I think that that's definitely an important thing to take into account in the Chaos Cube is what decks you're going to be running up against, because there will be a Flyers deck. So yeah, just picking up those things that will keep you alive long enough to actually play your big payoffs is very important as well.
It's funny you say that because in my third round, I played yet another green deck, and this was the player who ended up replacing Crackshot. And he had the best reach creature in the cube in his deck, and it had this ability where you pay green, green, and X. I think it's called like Silk Lash Spider. And it deals X damage to each creature with flying. Despite that being such a good answer to the Flyers deck, I decided that it was just too good. It was unfun. It's the kind of thing where you can't even play a creature with flying. It's just going to get mowed down. So trying to play that matchup would be miserable. But actually, if I remember correctly, so I just said that like you and I were both in red green and this other person was in green. Someone else was playing 5 colors. I think if I remember correctly, all told, 6 people were in green. So
yeah.
Wow.
I think that has less to do with green being a very powerful color I think it has more to do with the fact that packs draft.info are just totally random. Like for instance, today there were 3 Boros drafters out of 8 people. I remember thinking like, hey, this pack has so many red cards, I'm almost definitely going to wheel something on color. And despite there being 2 other Boros drafters in the same pod, I did wheel something. I think that's less of an issue for my cube in particular and more kind of something we're going to have to deal with in terms of using draft.
Yeah, I got the same kind of signals during the Chaos Cube where I'd see these like powerful red-green spells wheel and I'd be like, oh, red-green's wide open. I should just focus in on that. And then it turns out it wasn't.
Yeah, competing with 2 people, the 5-color person and me.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, but it is just also very hard to read signals if you are not very knowledgeable about the cards in the format. So in a cube that's new for you, or also in a cube where there's such high variance because it's 2,800 cards, it's way harder to read signals because you don't know what might have been taken over this or that compared to like a basic limited set like M21 or whatever. You know, there's only a certain range of cards people could take over this shock or whatever, and it's easier for you to figure out what might be missing.
I think another, and you kind of alluded to this, another reason that's the case is because people practically have like a muscle memory with the regular draft formats, something like M21 or something like Vintage Q that gets drafted over and over. But these draft formats, like it could be like a 360 card cube or a 288 card one, right? Like the Star Wars one. And it doesn't necessarily matter how many cards are in it because, you know, if you're not super familiar with which cards people take highly, it's still going to be very difficult to read the signals.
Yep.
Right. So any other words anyone wants to say about Chaos Cube, or shall we move on?
Well, I just want to repeat something that you said because Chaos Draft is coming back to Magic Online. That's the great news.
Yes.
So maybe we can talk about that. And something you said is about the green cards or creatures getting worse in the older sets. Like there will be a lot of old cards in these sets, and there are a lot of old cards that stall the board, like regenerators, but also like onboard combo tricks. And these make like medium-sized green creatures of pretty bad. Like, they can do work, but they are probably worse than moderns. This is also why flyers often are great because boards tend to stall out. So I think that makes it a little bit of a compliment to your Chaos Cube that this experience, like it reminds me just a lot of actual Chaos Draft.
Yeah. It's hard to take that as praise though, just because, you know, I may have accomplished what
I mean, it's what you set out to do at first,
right.
at least.
Yeah, but now my I'm setting my sights a little higher.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think this ends the pertinent topics that Joe is going to speak to. So thank you once again for joining us on the podcast. It's been nice having you. Maybe we'll have you again.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a lovely time.
Awesome.
Right. Have a good day.
You too.
See you soon.
Right. So yeah, Crackshot, Jacob, just as you were talking about, Chaos Draft is coming back, and it really can't be soon enough. I'm already counting the days. I noted some of the cards that I find, and they kind of, what you said describes them too. Cards that stall the board, I think, are often underrated and usually extremely powerful. Number one card like this, in my opinion, would be Pingers. So that can range from the red cards that tap to deal damage, or maybe you pay a mana and tap it to deal damage, but also the white cards that tap to deal damage to an attacking or blocking creature, especially when they deal more than 1 damage, can really start adding up and getting oppressive. So those cards, I think, you rarely want to pass those. I'm almost always happy to pick them highly. Another kind of similar one that stalls the board would be healers, things that prevent damage, especially things that, again, prevent more than 1 damage. So you have like the Saltfield Recluse, which I think gives -2/-0. There's, I think, Troubled Healer, which can prevent 2 damage to certain things. Those cards are just really extremely powerful. Pingers were so good that I ended up cutting them from the Chaos Cube. I left the healers in for now, but they might prove to be a little too powerful as well. I guess the main point I wanted to make about these cards and what they have in common is just cards with activated abilities are very, very nice. Like especially creatures. We already said that the creatures in Chaos Draft are weaker than normal because old sets have weaker creatures.
Weaker by power level, like power toughness compared to mana cost, weaker.
Right.
But there are certain types like these pingers and healers that they just don't print nowadays anymore because of the board complexity they add. Like with the New World Order design point, they decided they don't want so many onboard tricks anymore, especially not that common. And that was just because boards tended to stall out, partly because players would not be able to grasp the board situations anymore and were just afraid to act, which, it's not a great thing to have.
No, it's not. And it's one of the reasons that like blue-white flyers is such a classically well-known archetype in Chaos Draft. You dodge most regenerators like we were talking about earlier. The cards that prevent damage to creatures in particular, not nearly as effective when your creatures aren't able to block. So be on the lookout for creatures with evasion. I think they're like that can be among top picks as well.
Also be even more cautious when putting things with just one toughness in your deck.
Right.
Pingers will have a field day when they find you playing creatures. Like they need to have a really, really good ability to play them. Just a 2/1 for 2 is very risky.
That's true. 2-mana 2/2s. You end up needing to run those a fair amount of the time, in my opinion, in Chaos Draft. But you have to watch out when you're playing a bunch of X1s. There are pingers themselves, like we've talked about, but there are also enchantments that allow creatures to turn into pingers. There are plenty of cards, instants or sorceries that deal 1 damage to things. It's like Spark Spray. So you really need to think about the meta, I guess.
But these effects, like not repeatable effects that just deal 1 damage or give something -X, -0, they are good sideboard cards in my opinion. For example, to deal with pingers or healer.
Right.
So people take those, in my opinion, even lower than they should. Like they are not great mana cards, but I love to have this type of effect in my sideboard.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I've always been a fan of taking it's called like Duergar Assailant. It's like a 1-mana 1/1. It's like a Boros hybrid card, and you can sack it to deal a damage to an attacking or blocking creature. It's not a card I want to main deck, but it's usually pretty solid out of the sideboard, even if it doesn't hit pingers or healers too often. What I wanted to talk about in terms of Chaos Draft is that what we know about it so far is that it's going to be quote unquote original Chaos Draft. So what I understand that to mean is definitely the weaker older sets like Kamigawa block, Mirrodin block. But there's also a chance that we could be seeing Masters sets. We could be seeing...
I think it means that,
yeah. We could be seeing core sets. I personally like core sets. I know a lot of people don't like having core sets in their Chaos Draft. I think that they kind of provide a nice, even like power level between the newest sets included and some of the oldest. Maybe they're not the most exciting cards, but where I start dissenting a little more is when it comes to the very weakest and the very strongest sets. So yeah, things like Masters sets, things like Kamigawa block, because those sets really warp the power level of the format. So be very interested to see whether those things are included, but based on the label original, I would assume that they both are.
All right. And you also put down in our show notes something else that they only tease.
Right. So I think a good way to segue into this is to return to what we were talking about in terms of creatures from older sets being less powerful. We have an upcoming format, and they definitely gave it an exciting name called Supreme Draft. It's coming to Magic Online in the near future. It's on a Magic Online edition article for Double Masters, which I will make sure to link if any of you are interested in the schedule. And so we don't know anything about it except for I believe the words used were it's something Magic Online is uniquely positioned to do. So to me, what that means is something Magic Online can support, but Arena can't. So the first thing that comes to mind for me as something Magic Online can support, but Arena can't, would be older cards. So could end up seeing something not super dissimilar to a Chaos Draft. On that, I really have no idea what we'd be looking at. So yeah, Crackshot, do you have any kind of speculation about what kind of stuff we'll be seeing?
What am I wishing for?
I guess maybe I'll reframe the question. Is there anything else you think Magic Online is uniquely positioned to do that Arena isn't?
I would also think of old cards first. Obviously, answer there.
Right. Like it used to be, I was thinking, because I think on Magic Online you used to have like 64-person drafts or crazy things like that. But now on Arena, we have human drafting. So gaps between functionality of Magic Online and Arena are closing. So old cards, I think, is the number one.
Yeah. The only other thing I can think of is that somehow maybe import draft important. That could also, because that is not something that is possible on, probably never will be.
What about multiplayer functionality? Can you play multiplayer?
Oh, that could also be. Wow, but I don't know how that would work. Maybe if you have to join the queue together somehow and already know who you're drafting with, then it could be amazing. Like,
yeah, it could be really fun. I have no idea, but regardless, I'm excited to see what Wizards has in store for us.
Oh boy, I now really hope for an online two-headed giant draft thing or something like that. It would be so cool.
That'd be sweet.
Or just team draft. Like you hear so many stories about team draft. I actually never did any myself, and that would be amazing. Like if you have to get a team together first and then join the queue as a team, that would be so sweet. But I guess it will just be old cards, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I've always wanted to enter some two-headed giant events myself, and it's kind of been bad luck that I've ended up avoiding them. So anything involving teams, I think, would be. The only kind of caveat is I feel like if it were going to be two-headed giant draft or team draft, that's what they would have called it instead of Supreme. So, little bit of doubt there, but yeah, regardless, I think we can expect some old cards, and I will just reiterate, I guess, that just because creatures, like vanilla creatures, are a lot weaker in these older sets on average, doesn't mean that creatures themselves are worse. For instance, like you have a lot more Flame Tongue Kavu type effects in older sets. But even beyond that, even the creatures that are not quite as obviously good, I would say, because you can expect to pick up good spells more often than good creatures become a higher priority than some of the like 3 damage, for instance, removal spells, things like that.
Yeah.
Right. And with that, you want to talk about the draft that you won today.
Yeah, just today we did another custom draft. It was the first time that Turn 2 Stormcrow, one of our members of our community, hosted a draft. Yeah, it was a very interesting draft. Like, everything worked out well for me. The very first few picks were interesting in my opinion, and then I just cruised through what the packs offered me. So, like at the very beginning, I saw a pack which had Fatal Push as the card that I would take in the end, as the only removal spell in it, basically. It's also had Fanning Flames, that's for X and red, and buyback for 3 and X spell, X to any target. But yeah, I wanted to take the cheap removal there. Just thought it's a good way to start off any draft. Keeps me flexible for aggressive or controlling strategies. And yeah, I was also thinking about Serendip Ifrit in the pack. It's for 2 and a blue. It's a very old card. A 3/4 flyer. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life, like very strong body. But basically, Fatal Push and Serendip Ifrit were the cards that I was eyeing up. Yeah, I took the removal spell. Then on pick 2, I took an X spell, Rolling Thunder, like fantastic X spell, like X and red, the sorcery that deals X damage divided among any number of targets of your choice. Yeah.
I think you'd have to be like really dumb to pass Rolling Thunder. And just to throw this in here, I was the one passing to you. And the card I took over it was Loxodon Warhammer.
Oh boy.
Also a strong one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Rolling Thunder was my second choice, and it was fairly close. If the hammer weren't colorless, I'm sure I would have made the same pick. But yeah, do I continue?
Yeah, I thought that this might be a sign, like at least that red might be open, because I couldn't imagine a red card you would take over it. But as we said, reading signals is hard, so I didn't want to put too much emphasis on this. But notably, there was nothing really black in the pack. There was a black-red gold card only on medium power level, and a Whisperer Blood Liturgist for 4 mana, a 2/2, tap and sacrifice two creatures, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So yeah, it's a engine piece, but nothing really in black to go with my first pick. So that's why Rolling Thunder was a clear pick to me. And then pick 3 had Possessed Scarab. And and the other card I was also thinking about in the same pack was Tragic Slip. Tragic Slip is an instant for black, -1/-1 to target creature until the end of turn, or Morbid, like if creature died, then it's -13/-13 until end of turn instead. And I also thought about that because it would have gone nice with the Fatal Push and possibly even the Rolling Thunder in maybe some kind of a black-red deck. At that point, I quickly checked the description of the cube by Turn to Stormcrow to see what black-red is supposed to be. And Rakdos is, citing overview of the cube now, similar to Cruel Rakdos, just does not have much depth to it at all. The main goal in this archetype is to kill your opponent before they get a chance to do their thing, like all aggro decks. So the keyword I was looking for in here that was not there was something a sacrifice theme. Aristocrat sacrifice, something like that. I think if I would have found that keyword in the Rakdos description, then I would have taken the Black Instant. Just because these Aristocrat decks, they can be relatively controlling, giving me the time to cast a big Rolling Thunder at some point in the games. But if it's just an all-out aggressive deck, then the Rolling Thunder doesn't really fit the bill there. And therefore, I took the other card that I really liked out of this pack, which is the Possessed Scarab. It's 3 blue and black, a 3/2, and when it comes into play, you return an instant, sorcery, or creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and if it would die, exile it instead. And yeah, I thought, maybe I'll go to some very dirtly Grixis deck, or maybe just blue-black with the Fatal Push. It was a bit of a gamble because it's relatively early to take a gold card here, but I really liked it. So can you see the pick as well?
Did you happen to know that there is an Aristocrats archetype?
I just, at this point, knew there is no Aristocrats archetype in black-red. That's what I checked, and I found it was not there, so I decided that I wouldn't go for it.
The only reason I mention this is because Turn 2 Stormcrow, the cube creator, and I think also the person you faced in round 3,
yes,
was on Black-Green Aristocrats, a deck that I was really impressed by. I did not expect Black-Green would be doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, the deck was cool.
Yeah.
I really like it.
It was unique.
Bit of the wall archetype in this combination. Yeah.
So I feel like in your spot, you're not really incentivized to try to move into like Golgari and Tragic Slip, good card as it is. I feel like the power level is much lower than Possessed Scarab. I really like that card. I think I first drafted it in one of my first Chaos drafts, and I was just really impressed by it. It's a sweet one. So yeah, I think it's a pretty reasonable choice there.
Yeah. And then pick 4, I saw Ghostly Flicker, and something I've talked a lot about with Tisby, somebody who joined our draft today. We both always keep these flicker effects in mind when building our cubes and try not to overdo it, because something like Possessed Scarab with something like Ghostly Flicker and a third value card is a very, very hard to disrupt, repeatable source of card advantage. So Ghostly Flicker is an instant for 2 and a blue, and you exile 2 target artifact, creatures, and or lands you control. Then return those cards to the battlefield under your control. So what happens is, you have Avish Visionary. Something comes into play, you draw a card, Possessed Scarab, and Ghostly Flicker in hand. You just cast it, targeting the Scarab and the Visionary, and then the Scarab comes back, returns the Flicker to your hand, and because of the Visionary, you draw a card. So for every 3 mana you put in there, you draw a card. And this is even more crazy if you get like a Flame Tankavu effect or something like that.
Yeah. And I think that's what the archetype was actually designed to do. Turn 2 Stormcrow was saying that the Dimir Flicker deck was trying to take advantage of cards like Shriekmaw or cards like Necrotal. And it's something, it's actually not the first time I've seen someone design a deck that's supposed to be like amazing, like 2-for-1 creatures and flicker effects. And to me, you already have an amazing card for Peasant Cubes, right? Something like Necrotol or Shriekmaw. You don't need to make it any better. So that's where I think I would.
No, you don't need to, but it really slams the door on any game. Like, you cannot get outgrinded.
Right. And not to mention, like, you can like chump block forever, thanks to the flicker effect. If you have 2 flicker effects in hand, and if you go for a flicker and they kill something in response, you can just flicker again. It's really pretty silly.
The weakness of this strategy obviously being like aggressive opposing decks. So in the finals, as we said, I played against Turn to Stormcrow, the designer cube, on green-black aristocrats. And I had a great starting hand with my pick one, the Fatal Push, and I think also Opt and good mana. And I set my have fun and good lucks, and very quickly F6'd my first turn.
Oh no.
But I thought it was okay. I had a very strong hand, thought I could come back. But yeah, their hand was also like great starting hand, and a lot of 1-drops, and like they had Diagraph Ghoul on turn 1, which I then Fatal pushed, which I would regret a little bit later. Then on turn 2, they had Young Wolf, and for 1 black, a 1/1 that can't block, and you can sacrifice a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on it. What is that card called again?
Carrion Feeder?
Yeah, Carrion Feeder, exactly. So that was their turn 2. And yeah, then they kept playing 2 spells per turn until I was dead, basically. I just couldn't keep up. And I had a lot of 2-for-1 creatures in my deck. Like just 3 mana 2/2 comes to play, you lose 1 life, draw a card, something like that.
Phyrexian Rager, Dusk Legion.
Yeah, the Rager.
I'm looking at your deck list. Seagate Oracle, Raven Familiar.
Anyway. Yeah, all of that stuff. And I played most of them. But I was forced to always block something, and it would just trade for 1 creature. And the number of cards in my hand just wouldn't matter at all. And I didn't get the chance to play my flicker effects on my creature, getting even further card advantage. Because I was just dying, because they went so broad and all their threats were relatively resilient. And yeah, that's how I lost game 1. But I did come back in games 2 and 3, where they just flooded out a little bit after mulliganing, and that's how I did it. But their deck was definitely very sweet.
Yeah, so speaking of their deck, one card that they were chatting with me about was, it has like algae in the name. I don't remember the full name of the card. It's
Algae Gariel.
Yeah, I think so. 4-mana 1/1.
The Shroud 1/1.
Right. And yeah, whenever the creature dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. That was the card that ended up destroying me game 3 against them, when I felt like if it didn't have Shroud, there's a decent chance I would have won. I'm not saying I would have, but I at least would have had the possibility. And they were talking to me about whether Shroud and Hexproof should be avoided. So I'm not entirely clear on what the power level of the cube is after only 1 draft, but I do think that as you increase power level, like especially if you think that 1 archetype is supposed to be like Necrotol times as many flicker effects as you have or whatever, I think that kind of thing like Shroud is more acceptable. Like for instance, in my deck, I was super impressed by this card. It's called Flickering Ward. It's 1 white mana to give a creature protection from the color of your choice. And for 1 white mana at instant speed, you can return it to your hand. So that was a tiny bit like Shroud, because I was able to protect some of my creatures from removal. I noticed my second opponent using removal in an awkward way because of the Flickering Ward. Another thing.
Wow, that's a cool card.
Yeah.
I've never seen it. I don't know.
Are you ready for this one though? Because this was really sick. So my opponent reanimated Palaka Worm, right? And I think they reanimated it with Dance of the Dead. So I reread the Flickering Ward, and I realized that it doesn't say enchant creature you control. So I put the but then it gets better. So I enchanted the Palaka Worm, right? I named black, but it doesn't instantly die. What happens is the aura instantly falls off, then the trigger for the Palaka Worm to die goes on the stack. So then I returned the Flickering Ward to my hand and proceeded to have, just like a 0-for-1 kill your Palaka Worm.
Oh, that's so sweet. Flickering Ward is very high now on my list of cards I should add. Wow, that card is cool.
Yeah.
So many possibilities.
It was definitely a sweet moment. It does beg the question, if you are considering removing hexproof and shroud from your cube, I would absolutely remove protection too, because I would argue that protection is a more miserable mechanic than either hexproof or shroud.
But I mean, it's still a little bit dangerous to run the Flickering Ward. Like, it has a lot of things going for it, but power level is pretty higher.
Yeah, I got 2-for-1 once trying to enchant something and then just having the thing killed in response, but I was aware that was a possibility. I wasn't super worried about it. And I was playing a red-white heroic deck where the ward is even better than usual because I could repeatedly bounce it to my hand, replay it, get another heroic trigger.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about this Peasant Cube?
Oh yeah, one last thing. Like, one of the other players that I played against in round 2, Snogglesworth or Snog, they were very happy to have picked up a lot of the bounce lands, the Guild Karus.
Right.
And they are very, very good in Peasant Cube environment. And I agree to that. Like, they're 2-for-1s, they fix your mana, they're just great. But I managed to severely blow them out. I was on the play, game 1, and turn 2 I had a Fabled Stone. Yeah, they played land, bounce land, bounce land, like something else small. But then on my turn 5, I hit them with Dendrova Horror.
Oh no.
Which is a 4 blue and a black 4/4. When it comes into play, you return target permanent to its owner's hand, and that player discards a card. So I set the back by 2 land drops, and I had discard a card, and I had a 4/4. And then on my next turn, I played Illusionist Stratagem. This is for 4 mana, blinks 2 creatures and draws a card, targeting my Seagate Oracle and my Dendrova Horror, and bounce the other Karu. So that was that game. And it felt so good, but also so dirty. Like, yeah.
If you don't concede there, at that point, you just don't even know that you have a concede, because that's breaking in a half.
That was something else for sure. Yeah, but that made me think a little bit about an idea I had for this Pyramid Cube, the relatively low power level format I'm working on. And I decided that the power level should be low, but I don't want to restrict the mana with this power level. Like, the power level should be good. So I'm putting all of the good fixing cards available at Peasant. And maybe I will even do it with rares, I don't know. But to balance that out, I was thinking if it would be nice and or interesting to have land destruction available. And I'm not sure if that would be fun or not. I think it would be interesting, but what do you think?
Are you talking about your Pyramid Cube or turn 2?
Yes, I'm talking about the Pyramid Cube. Like, no, like traditionally, like Stone Rain wouldn't be a great card. It wouldn't be a high pick, probably go very late. Maybe it would even be something like Demolish, the card that we so often talk about.
I don't know. I think that would be interesting. I have considered putting a cube together where there's like a Ponza archetype, but I'm not really sure because I know what little I know about Pyramid Cube. I know that the more colors something is, the better it's supposed to be. So
yes,
I'm trying to figure out a world where I have these monocolored land destruction spells, and they were like worse than the 2-color cards and worse than the 3-colored cards, but they're not like 4 mana destroy a land.
Yeah, I think they would be like at 4 mana destroy a land bad, but maybe they would be. And I wonder if that could work. Like, will these spells then be viable, and will they host the gold cards to a degree that is interesting? Or I don't know, it could be that I'm building like the most horrible gaming environment ever.
Doubt it.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting because like if you make it clear to everyone that the most powerful things you can be doing require the most colors, and it makes sense that it would be powerful to disrupt someone's colors, right? Someone's mana base.
Yeah.
The question is like, where do you draw the line? Like, how expensive are these multicolored cards? Are they like 7 mana or are they like 4 mana?
No, they're not. They should be just a better rate. Like, when you compare them, they should be compelling for you to pick them. Like, there's the Loxodon, no, not Loxodon, Rox Warmonk, for example, is one of the 3-color cards.
Got it. Yeah.
And nothing will have this rate at 2-color, and of the 2-color cards, they will have a better rate than anything single color. Yeah.
One thing I'm wondering about with the Pyramid Cube is how supported is aggro going to be? Are people going to be able to draft monocolor aggro? Like, will there be cards for it, or
Yes.
will it just lose to cards like Rock's Warmonk? Or
Well, I think they probably would lose to a Resolve Rock's Warmonk. Not necessarily. I want to put expensive removal in, so they could do something like that about that, or like Falter effect. Like there will be aggro available, and there's a little bit of like monocolor support even. Like I did put in the Eldraine basic land type common lands support monocolor to a little degree, and there also are in every color one land that can be sacrificed for an additional effect. Like they don't all from the same cycle. In white, there's the Memorial to Glory land that comes into play taps for white, or for 3 and white, you can sacrifice it to create 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens.
right?
I think actually it's 4 memorials, and then in red instead it's Blighted Gorge. It's a land that taps for colorless only, but for 4 and red you can sacrifice it to deal 2 damage to any target.
The classic problem of memorials are great, but the red one is terrible. How do you complete the cycle?
Yes, exactly. But well, maybe with enough bounce lands, the red one is no, not even.
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking, like, you consider the red one in if you're thinking about like land destruction either as an archetype or as a theme. But I think regardless, I guess my point about monocolor is I think it's actually important that you include it, just because it seems like otherwise you're saying best thing you can do is play the highest number of colors. So then everyone's going to try to do that. It seems like it would make more sense if people have a choice. They say, do I want to play the most consistent deck where I'm going to be wheeling white cards and easily have enough playables and never worry about colored mana? Or do I want to play a deck with a lot higher power level cards? And I think that also creates more like skill and nuance in terms of signal reading. So I'm glad that you made that choice.
Yeah, and white will also be relatively aggressive. Like red is probably aggressive and has like some land destruction things going on, and white will probably be aggressive with some artifact synergies going on. But like everything is not written in stone yet, and I will have to see where it develops.
Right. So do you want to move on to M21? I think you had a few comments about that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, M21. It's been an interesting experience for me. I haven't drafted too many drafts in the 10s or low 20s, I think. I drafted much more Ikoria than I drafted M21, but it's very odd. Like the format is not super compelling to me, but I do love the cards, and I added like about 20 of them already to my Peasant Cube, the Mad Peasant. And I'm contemplating a few more. And I think it could be interesting to talk on air if about 2 of them, where I have very concrete swaps that I would make if I would include them, but I am not sure I want to include. And the first one of them is Carrion Grub. So it's 3 and a black for an 05 insect, and when it comes into play, you mill 4 cards, and it gets +X+0 greatest power among creature cards in your graveyard. So it's a one-shot mill with a relevant body attached to it. And the card I would take out for it would be Mindwreck Harpy, which is a bit of an oddball because it has not been printed in a real draft set before. It was only in some kind of weird pre-constructed introductory thing. And it's also for 3 and a black, a 3/2 flyer, enchantment creature Harpy. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, each player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. So the effect is not quite as immediate as the Carrion Grub, but if you play it in a pre-combat main phase, if the opponent does not have a stop set, you will get the first mill off. But it does mill both players, but also it's a repeated mill.
Yeah.
So I'm unsure which of those cards I want to have. They're both there to support only one archetype, which is green-black self-mill. It has some cards that care about Delirium or Threshold, but also a little bit of reanimation. So very hard for me to decide which of these cards I like more. And I want to include one of them, but not both.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting decision. I like that they do the same thing at the same mana cost. Like not even just converted mana cost, but literally the same mana cost. I like the Harpy a lot. It's a card that when I first saw it spoiled, I was thinking, oh, this would be a sweet card to be in the set. And I, of course, realized from the collector's number that it wasn't. But at first, I thought Carrion Grub, well, I underrated it a lot when it first came out. So at first, I thought it was 5 mana. So when I realized it was 4, I was that much more excited about it. But it's a card I've been trying in my own Peasant Cube, and I've liked it quite a bit.
Yeah, so like one of the small things going for the Harpy is that like for Delirium, it also gives you the enchantment type.
Right, if it dies, yeah.
If it dies, yeah. But being so much more fragile, I think, I don't know.
What I was going to say is, in terms of the Carrion Grub, in my own Peasant Cube, so my green-black and blue-black archetypes can both play kind of their classic game, where it's like blue-black functions mostly as control, or green-black functions as like a mid-range. I also put in some kind of micro synergies where if you see all the right cards, if you're not competing with anyone else, you can play a Reanimator deck in either Golgari or Dimir. And Carrion Grub is a big part of either of those decks. And so one of the reasons I've liked the card so much is if you spike like a Sandworm or something off your mill, suddenly you have a 4-mana 7/5, right?
Great, yeah. But only until you reanimate it.
Right. It can be a bit clunky. But I, in general, have been really impressed with the card because the Reanimator combo takes a few pieces. You have to find the card you want to reanimate, you have to put it into the graveyard, and then you have to bring it back. This can put the card into the graveyard and potentially find it if you're lucky enough to hit it in the top 4, or if you get it into the graveyard another way. And without having to reanimate it, you get most of the payoff, I would say, from reanimating one of these big threats. So I guess my first question is, are you supporting any reanimation in your Golgari graveyard deck?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
It's actually very interesting. It's a good point because you could just also reanimate the Grub with your first reanimation spell and get a decent result. Not be embarrassed by. More so than the Harpy, I guess.
That's true. The other thing I was going to say is I think the Harpy's ability to repeatedly mill is really interesting. But at the same time, I don't like it at all.
Yeah, the card is much more of an oddball. And I also fear a little bit that even the deck, the green-black self-mill deck, when they have to do cuts, and you very often have to make some hard cuts, they will just not include the Harpy just because it's so weird and you never know what will happen if you mill the opponent as well. And
right.
Yeah,
I think so. There are a few things going on with the milling ability. The reason I don't like it, the first one, which I think is the simplest, is it can just lead to a game loss, whether it's you or your opponent. Someone's decking eventually. The second thing, which is a tiny bit less intuitive, is if you're trying to put parts of your library into your graveyard, this makes it really easy. Like this eliminates a lot of the work you have to do. It just does it for you. I feel like, you don't even need to pick up other cards that go with it that perform a similar kind of effect, because all you need to get into play is this card, if it survives a few turns.
Yeah, so you draft Mindfreak Harpy and the Worm Harvest.
Oh, yeah.
So you just Harpy, and then you wait until you find your Worm Harvest, and then it's done.
Yeah, you just go nuts. The thing is, I really do like the card, but I don't like the way it spirals out of control, like particularly in Limited. If we were talking about 60-card decks, it might be a different matter, but I feel like 3 cards per turn.
It mills really quickly, right?
Yeah.
Like the speed of the mill is like Ashiok, right? Ashiok is also 3.
Symmetrical Ashiok, yeah. I think it's interesting. I think it is like I know for me which decision I would make. I think I made that pretty clear, but I do think it is a pretty close choice in general.
Yes, you would go with the Grub.
At least I would test it out, see how it works.
I think I want to test out the Mindfreak Harpy. I think as soon as I see somebody do something with the Harpy that is good, then the Harpy will go and the Grub will come.
Fair enough. Right.
Just because I want to see the oddball thing happen once.
Sure. Want to move on to the next close choice for you?
Yeah, it's the new card, Garruk's Uprising, which is 2 and a green for an enchantment. And when it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. Then it gives creatures you control trample. And then whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. And it's competing against an older card, Absent Beastmaster. And that is at the same mana costs again. And nowadays it's a dog shaman. Once was a hound shaman. So it's 2 and a green for a 2/1. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card if you control the creature with the greatest toughness or tied for the greatest toughness. So we have 2 cards here that are supposed to draw cards for the deck that's going beefy. And the archetypes that it's supposed to help out is a blue-green proliferate deck to a maybe lesser extent, and then to a stronger extent, green-white. It used to be very aura-focused and is slowly turning more into a basic all kinds of enchantress focus. And red-green ramp supply those additional cards. Yeah, so what do you think about the cards?
Okay. So first of all, I do have Garruk's Uprising in my Peasant Cube as well, so I do have a bit of experience with it. It replaced, gosh, I don't know if I'll be able to remember the card. It's 2 and a green for an enchantment that I think it says at the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card if you control a creature with the greatest power. Yeah, the name escapes me for now. It should be there on the YouTube version. I figure it out. One of the things I noticed right off the bat is you were talking about decks it goes into, and you mentioned like a green-white deck that used to be a little more aura focused. Not sure to what extent archetype still relies on auras, but it is pretty awkward, in my opinion, to be playing the Garruk's Uprising with auras because creatures aren't necessarily going to enter the battlefield with power 4 or greater. Only once they've been modified will they have kind of stats. Another thing is it feels like the Garruk's Uprising goes in a very specific, like quote unquote ferocious archetype. And that's what in my Peasant Cube red green deck is trying to do. I do like one thing that I don't know if you pointed out. I know you said that the Uprising gives trample, and I really do enjoy that. For the beefy creature deck, that's something that you don't get the Beastmaster. But at the same time, even in my extremely 4+ power committed like red green archetype, doesn't always feel like Garruk's Uprising deserves a slot, and it usually has to do with the matchup. So, for instance, say I'm playing against blue-white flyers, right? Garruk's Uprising is kind of a blank because those games are about racing. If I'm trying to race, then something that's just trying to draw me cards and give things trample is not really the most effective, in my opinion. It feels really bad to take a card that was designed for that particular archetype and say, okay, to the sideboard you go. Then you start wondering, should I have started with this in the sideboard? And I don't know. I do like parts of the card, but I don't think it's always great. Beastmaster, on the other hand, I feel like it works better with Selesnya if you're modifying creatures. I feel like you don't have the same problem if you're in like a racing matchup because, as you pointed out, it does have a body. And what?
Yep.
Mana 2/1 is maybe not the most exciting body ever. In fact, it's actually a pretty underwhelming body, but mana 2/1 draw a card, suddenly, that sounds quite a bit more appealing. Just the fact that it's not like a stone blank in the wrong matchup, I think. Unless, I guess it technically can be if your opponent's able to go a little bigger than you are, because you're not drawing a card for having something with the greatest toughness. I think.
Yeah, the 2/1 doesn't do.
I think it makes more sense. The Beastmaster does in your cube, especially if I have a red-green archetype based on creatures with power 4 or greater, and even there. Something like Furious Rise, I'm a much bigger fan of than something like Garruk's Uprising.
Yeah, I think I agree.
Right.
I think so. We have one time the new card, one time the old card from you, and for me, basically the same, except I'm still a little bit too in love with the Mind Wreck card with the X yet.
It is a really sweet card. I'm excited to see how it plays. I remember both playing a blue-black deck against a blue-black deck, and I think my opponent lost from decking. I'm just wondering, like, I board in my Mindrak Harpy to win that matchup. Anyway,
that would be cool.
That's pretty much it for what we're going to talk about this time.
Yeah, thank you everybody for sharing your time with us, and for Turn to Stormcrow for hosting today, and want to invite you again, join our Discord and be part of the community and play cube drafts with us.
Absolutely. Or build your own cube and host your own drafts of that. Thanks for listening as always. Thanks again to Joe for joining us. And yeah, be cubing.
Bye-bye, everybody.
See you soon.